Hello everybody, my name is Jordan, coming out to you from SANDCRAFT Motorsports for another DIY installation for a driveline and carrier bearing combination with grease whip. Today we're going to be working on a 2020 RZR Turbo. This is a 2-seat, but all steps apply to the 4-seat as well. So the first part to removing the 2-seat driveline is you want to remove the clutch cover, just using an 8mm socket. All of the installation can be performed with the vehicle on the ground, but we're going to lift it into the air just for viewing purposes. So here we are underneath the vehicle. What we're going to do is use a 10mm if you have a factory skid plate and remove all sections. Now that the skid plate is removed, we have access to the flange that holds the driveline of the transmission. This requires a 6mm Allen, and what we're going to do is actually utilize the transmission in park to hold the flange stationary while we break the bolts loose. Once you have two loose that you can access, what you can do is reach up to the transmission, put the transmission into neutral, just roll the driveline to access the others. Put the transmission back in park, and that'll be your holding fixture. So even though today we're working on a 20 model RZR, the 17 and newer vehicles all are equipped with a fuel cell scatter guard. It's held in place with 3 bolts, and what we're going to do is with a 10mm at the back and going forward to 15mm. What we're going to do is remove one of the bolts from the intercooler support bracket here, and that's going to give us some flexibility to wiggle all of the components out. So now that we've got all of the bolts out of the scatter guard, what we need to do is slide it forward just enough to drop the tail down, and it will come down in this sort of a motion, a swinging down to the driver's side of the vehicle. Push the plate forward enough to where we can get it down. Just for ease of removal, loosen and remove both sway bar links on the front. Now that we have access for our tool, what we're going to be doing is using a pin punch to remove this roll pin that's the retainer for the drive shaft to the pinion gear on the differential. If you look around, all the way around, you can see that your roll pin will be partially removed. We're going to attack the easier side here. Try and keep it as horizontal as possible, and lots of little taps to remove this roll pin. So we have the roll pin out. We have the scatter guard / carrier bearing bolts out, so those are the same. And we have our rear flange bolts out. So we're going to start back here. Again, patience is key. We move our rear driveline backward. Then we shift our front half towards the rear until it's off, free from the differential. We tuck that back up. Now our 2 halves are free. And this is why we took the clutch housing off earlier. The rear half is just going to exit the vehicle, and then our front half. So what I've done here is laid out the original factory equipment so you can see exactly how the swap over is going to work. You're going to get rid of some of the factory hardware, but keep the washers. We're going to discard these bolts, but keep the washers. What we're doing is we're going to lay the scatter guard over the RCR driveline to use this as reference to where you're going to want to drill a hole for access of the grease Zerk and or install the accessory grease whip. So what I've got is the base plate attached to the bearing just for reference only to show you exactly where to drill the hole. So we're going to line it up. Again, this is just a reference. And you can see through that we're going to want to drill a hole right in this section here. So I've opened it up to about 18mm, 19mm hole because there is a little bit of flexibility in the base plate as far as aligning to your vehicle. So you're going to want a little of that. But as you can see, lines up right over the Zerk. What you're going to want to do is use a 5/16. Get the Zerk out of your way. You can discard this, you won't need it any longer. And that allows access for your grease whip. And this is once it's in the vehicle. This is just for for visual aesthetics. So one of the beautiful parts about the Gen 3 design carrier bearing is that it's got a separated base plate that actually you install before the rest of the driveline equipment. We strongly advise that you reinstall the scatter guard, and that's the first part of reassembly. So prior to reinstalling the scatter guard, what we're going to do is we're going to want to move the brake hose from its mounting tab here to the opposite side of the intercooler mounting bracket, because that's going to give us more room for the actual carrier assembly inside of the scatter guard. So your cooler bracket and your scatter guard are going to be right side of the vehicle from the brake hose. With the scatter guard back in place, we're going to go ahead and start our hardware, and this is going to be alignment for our base plate and to make sure that everything is in place before we tighten any of our bolts. So we're going to reinstall the washers with our new RZR hardware, and then the one 10mm for the rear. With a scatter shield front 2 bolts in place and just only a few threads exposed, we can reinstall the third mounting bolt. With the Gen 3 2-piece design, is that in order to get correcting the driveline angle, is that we mount the base plate for the carrier on the bottom of the frame. There's actually recesses in the bushings that jump and house the weld nuts inside, so that the base plate is actually mounted to the bottom of the frame. So what we have here is the bolts only have a few threads exposed, because we're going to slip this into the frame. It hangs on just like that with the offset to the driver's side of the vehicle. And then we run the bolts all the way down through. And in the hardware kit is washers and nuts to hang the carrier support from the bottom of the frame. This stud on the driver's side, I like to run all the way down. And you can actually start the washer and then the all-metal lock nut. But on the passenger side, it gets a little bit tricky because you can't go directly onto the hardware. So you actually have to sort of set it on the frame, sort of in a shelf style, and then time the bolt down into. Just get a deep socket on the ratchet and chase it all the way down through. All right, and now we're going to reinstall the intercooler bracket bolt, and we'll be ready to pop the driveline in. Plenty of room, slips all the way in with the bearing on, and you want to bring it all the way to the front and just a little to the driver's side of the front differential. And that will let you get all the way up in front of the bearing, as you can see. Now that the driveline is slid all the way forward, it's just in front of the support base, and that gives us plenty of room to install the rear half. And when you go to meet them in the middle, you want to pay attention to your master spline that should be highlighted and in line with your Zerk here. You go ahead and slip them together. And now that we're splined together in the middle, we're going to go to the back where the flange is, line up the flange, and install the flange bolts. And continuing to work our way forward, what we're going to do is install the carrier to base plate hardware. And we know that since the front half is pinned to the differential, this is our final length. So this is where we're going to tighten down the carrier at. We're going to apply just a little bit of thread locker that comes in your kit. And believe me, a little bit goes a long way, so you don't need to go too crazy. So I'm lifting up on the driveline just to give myself a little clearance. You want to start with the passenger side. And as we get these close to the home, we have to wrench them, and our target is 20 foot-pounds of torque. Now we come all the way up front to where we installed our pin earlier. Roll it around the exposed side using supplied metal lock nut. There is no actual torque for this. You just want to make sure that the locker is engaged. Once you have that in place, you come back to the set screws and you want to set them as well. We're going to roll it 180 degrees to expose the other set screw. A little drop of blue thread locker. And set this guy. It's a target 6 pounds. After the pinion section of the driveline is wrapped up, we're going to go ahead and reconnect our sway links with the links on the outside of the sway bar. What we're going to do is reinstall the skid plates, starting at the rear, working our way forward. And what you want to do is make sure that you get all bolts in before tightening any one of them. And now that we've got the car on the ground with the suspension compressed, it swings out the shock a little bit and should be a little easier to get the clutch cover back into place. For those of you that went with the grease whip option, what we're going to do is show you a convenient and user-friendly mounting location. So I've got the seats removed already. We're going to start to remove the center console by removing the plastic rivets at the rear, and then moving forward to the Torx 40s on either side. 2 rivets here and here, and 1 more Torx 40. Now that we've exposed the scatter guard with the hole that we've drilled previously, we can go ahead and install the pipe thread end of the grease whip down into the bearing housing. Being as how it is a pipe thread, there isn't a torque spec as much as hand tight. We're going to drill a 3/8 hole right in this corner here. So you can see there's a good decent range of where you can actually mount the service port. We prefer to mount it over on the driver's side because we generally know the feet are going to be away from the Zerk. You can put it to the passenger side. This is just where we prefer, underneath the body panel over here. And now that we have everything mounted and sealed up, we can go ahead and reinstall the center console. So here you can see the finished product in a very convenient location that greatly reduces your service time. All right, well that wraps up our driveline and carrier bearing combination install with a grease whip option. Make sure you follow us on social media. Thanks for watching and enjoy the ride.